Good morning. How are we got any issues we need to address this morning before we get started?
I think there's only one, Your Honor, before Dr. Cohen. There are some other issues that can be taken up as they become timely and witnesses appear, so we don't waste time this morning.
Okay. What do we got? What's going on?
Dr. Cohen is, I believe, will be their first witness. You recall that previously she testified at a prior hearing. The court recalls I did file not only a motion to eliminate regarding her testimony, but also subsequent to that previous hearing, a Daubert motion. At the time that Judge Lewis was hearing the Daubert motions, Mr. Michaels and I had a discussion regarding Dr. Cohen. We felt that we could work it out without taking up the time, court's time. I believe we have reached an understanding. We just need to memorialize it on the record, and then Dr. Cohen can testify pursuant to that understanding, which alleviated hours worth of motion time, so we were able to work that one out.
I appreciate that.
I did send Mr. Michaels a copy of her previous testimony. Mr. Michaels.
That's fine.
Yeah. Maybe we just approach.
Uh-huh.
Submitted that to Mr. Michaels last night. I believe to the most part, we are in agreement, along with just a couple of matters that I need to put on the record.
Okay. All right, I reviewed that.
So that's what'll not happen. And then we've agreed that there'll be no testimony regarding the interview of Mr. Reeves and personal opinions regarding whether or not he was scared, whether or not she felt the case was justifiable, regarding the defendant's perception that he was a model police officer, that he did not choose to escalate the situation, her opinion he's not capable of violence, his perception no longer able to do the job, her opinion no mental problems, her opinion not believe that the defendant is capable of taking on a younger man, her opinion about his perception of vulnerability and why he did certain things. That she believes, her opinion, he did everything he could. Her opinion, he's old and disabled, and that's why he responded the way he did. Her opinion, no other choice. Her opinion, the aging process affects. Let me ask this last one on this.
Mr. Reeves.
Right. I just wanted to clarify the last one.
Okay.
That she's not going to opine that the aging process affected specifically Mr. Reeves' perception.
Okay.
So that's the, and Mr. Michaels can confirm that's the agreement.
Your Honor, that's the agreement. I mean, 90.702 tells us there are two types of expert opinion. One is to give an opinion of what the expert believes happened or should have happened. In this case, it's in the form of a dissertation. So essentially, we agree that Dr. Cohen's here to educate the jury regarding the aging, the process of aging, and how aging, the process manifests itself on certain decision-making, vulnerability, perception of vulnerability, those sort of things. Nothing to do directly with Mr. Reeves. She's not saying, I analyzed him and this is my opinion, so we agree with that.
Okay, very
And the
good.
state, I've taken her deposition.
Okay.
And she is qualified to do that. There's
Okay.
just one other matter we can approach.
Sure. All right, while that's being done, I'll announce all the presents. We've got Mr. Scott Rosenwasser for the state, Mr. Manny Garcia, Mr. Glenn Martin for state, Mr. Richard Escobar, Mr. Dino Michaels for defense, and Mr. Reeves is present, as is Karina Flores. Mr.
Thunderberg is in the back
Okay.
with the big screen.
Okay, very good. All right, can we go ahead and proceed then?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, bring them in.
Jurors enter in the courtroom, Your Honor.
All righty.
Jurors may be seated. Jurors are present and accounted for, Your Honor.
Thank you, Deputy. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for returning. Were you all able to abide by my instructions during the recess? Excellent, thank you. All right, Mr. Michaels?
Good morning, Your Honor. The defense will call Dr. Donna Cohen.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this call to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. All right. Go ahead, Mr. Michaels.
Please state your name.
Donna Cohen.
What is your profession?
I'm a professor emeritus in the Department of Community and Health Sciences at the University of South Florida.
And how long have you been at the University of South Florida?
I've been at the university since 1992.
And the department that you're a professor emeritus, first tell me what a professor emeritus means.
A professor emeritus is status given to certain faculty members upon their retirement. You have to be evaluated by your dean. It has to go to the provost and to the president. Not everybody becomes an emeritus. It's based upon your contributions over your professional career.
And how long did you serve as a professor at the University of South Florida?
Since 1992.
Now tell me what the department, tell me the name of the department again, please.
The department was Child and Family Studies.
And what does that have to do with aging?
Aging is a lifespan phenomenon, and the department that I was recruited to chair in 1992 was split into two pieces, and faculty moved into larger departments. It was an economic move.
Okay. And so was one of those pieces the study of aging? And aging
Absolutely.
related?
We had a substantial contingent of faculty members.
And is that the department that you started at University of South Florida?
The one I was recruited to was the Department of Aging and Mental Health in 1992.
All right. Now let's talk a little bit about your education. Undergrad?
Undergrad was at Duke University.
And what was your degree from Duke?
It was in zoology.
And what year did you graduate?
I believe it was 1969.
Your master's?
Was at the University of South Florida in the University of Southern California in
That was in 1973.
yes.
And what was your master's in?
My master's was a study of chromosomal changes. The chromosomes carry the genetic material, and was looking at the relationship of chromosome changes to people and their cognitive functioning as they got older.
Okay, and was that considered a specialization in adult development and aging?
Yes,
And what about your doctorate? Where did you get that from?
from the same institution.
Okay, and what was your doctorate in?
My doctorate was an evaluation of spatial abilities and verbal abilities in older adults past age 60. Until I did my study, nobody had looked at sex differences in spatial and verbal skills in people over the age of 60.
And again, did that specialization have to do with adult development and aging as well?
Yes,
Okay, now I imagine you had many positions between the years of 1975 and present. Is that fair to say?
yes, sir.
Let's go over just some of them.
Sorry. There's banging going on over there that seems like we might be able to alleviate. I'm sorry, Dr. Keller.
Director, well, let's start with this. 1976 and 1979, Assistant Professor, Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, School of Medicine, University of Washington. Tell me a little bit about that position.
I was recruited there as an assistant professor and was promoted to associate professor with tenure after 4 years. And I had the responsibilities of continuing my research. I also was teaching medical students, residents in psychiatry. I started the first training program for psychiatric fellows and psychology fellows in the country, and ran it with a gentleman who ran the residency program.
Okay. And again, having to do with the study of aging.
Yes, sir.
Now we're going to go forward. I know there were a lot of appointments in between. Let's go to 1981 to 1985. Division Head, Unified Division of Aging and Geriatric Psychiatry, Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York. Tell me about that position.
That was a position within the College of Medicine, the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and Montefiore Medical Center. As a PhD, not a MD psychiatrist, I was made division head because at that time there were really enough people to take that position. However, the two psychiatrists functioned as my co-division heads because of the obvious legal and clinical implications. There I started the first chief residency in geriatric psychiatry and got a number of grants from the National Institutes of Mental Health to improve medical school education. I also continued my research.
Okay, and if you would just lean a little back off the microphone, we're getting,
Sorry.
that's okay, we can hear you fine from that level. What about at the same time, postgraduate fellowship training program, the same institution?
That again was a program to recruit individuals who had wanted advanced training in geriatric psychiatry, and again, it was one of the first that was established in the country, and I probably had 20 fellows go through that who are now major leaders in the field today.
Okay, 1986 and 92, University of Illinois at Chicago, Deputy Director, Gerontology Center. Tell us a little bit about that.
I was also a professor in the School of Public Health, and I was assisting the dean, who was the director of the center, in basically the entire range of activities, from managing faculty in their research programs, training young faculty how to get grants. I was doing a significant amount of teaching across the university, and I worked with the president of the university at that time to get a major grant to plan what was then to be the 1991 White House Conference on Aging, which was changed for political reasons.
1992, Chair, Department of Aging and Mental Health, Florida Mental Health Institute at University of South Florida. Tell me about that.
There, I was chairman of a department of about 30 people. Becoming a chair means you're beginning to develop your departmental faculty, your student programming, and to minimize the amount of time you spent in research because you have to develop a class department. We did that, but I also had a group of faculty members who worked with me in my lab, so I was able to continue my research.
1993, Director of Aging Studies Initiative, University of South Florida. What's that about?
I was hired as a chair, but the provost and the president of the university wanted my dean to allow me to develop an aging initiative, which led to the first PhD program in aging studies in the country, and it also led to a major set of projects involving, I would say, 80% of the departments in the university.
Okay, and I know that's just some of your appointments. Let's talk about what are called editorial appointments. What's an editorial appointment?
An editorial appointment means you can either be appointed as an editor, where you have full responsibility for the overall quality of the journal. You can also be an associate editor, where your job is to review articles and also assist the editor in making decisions about the conclusions that other people meet. It's something that almost every faculty member does. I was editor of one particular journal for about 8 years, and then passed it off to someone else because I had other things to do.
Now let's talk about, what do you mean when you say journal? What does that mean?
There's many different journals that faculty members publish in, students publish in the field of psychology in general, in the field of traumatology, in the field of geriatrics, gerontology. There are journals that are regarded as Class 1 journals, which are the most difficult to get into with a high rejection rate. There are the middle and lower class journals, but we have to be careful about lower class journals because the field of aging has exploded and there are new areas opening up, and new journals start, and quite often students start publishing there.
So journals are like written articles that that teachers and educators would look at to learn about the field?
Teachers, educators, other faculty members trying to enhance their own research, other mental health professionals, a full range of gerontology, or the field of aging, is a highly interdisciplinary field, so there are many individuals who may have interest in those.
Okay, so from 1970, and you have several, let's go over a couple of them. 1997 to 1990 Editorial Board Experimental Aging Research. You did that for, it looks like 13 years.
Yes,
And is that a journal?
that's a journal, and it was a quality journal, and it was highly experimental. So
And is-
you didn't get clinical studies or qualitative studies. It was pretty heavy science.
And editorial board meaning what? You were invited to be on the editorial board?
You're invited, you're vetted, and approved, as long as you continue to do your work.
Okay. There's one for book review editor, behavior, health, and aging. What is that?
As editor of that particular journal, I did many of the book reviews because my associate editor was handling many of the administrative capacities, and it was a way to keep up with the field.
Okay. Between 1995 and 2004, you're on the editorial board of Journal of Aging and Identity, right?
Yes,
And also the Journal of Mental Health and Aging.
yes.
Let's talk about some of the professional and scientific societies you're a member of. You're a member of, or were a member of, American Psychological Association.
Yes.
Tell me, what is that?
American Psychological Association is the premier association for the field of psychology, ranging from forensic psychology to aging and human development to clinical. There may be 40 different divisions to that, and I stayed and was very active with that organization until I retired. So.
And what about the American College of Forensic Examiners Institute, American Board of Psychological Specialties, Diplomat in Medical Psychology?
I was a member there where I was participating in writing articles, doing education and training throughout the state of Florida, as well as other states, to write about my work in some forensic issues. And I also was working with a number of faculty members who were members of that organization, and we actually set up a coalition of researchers.
Now, you also received several awards throughout your career, right?
Yes.
Let's just go over some. 1997, Who's Who in Medicine and Healthcare. What is that one about?
Research and relevance.
Overall.
Who's Who in Medicine and Healthcare?
It's a listing to which people who meet certain standards or have certain credentials are listed as being nationally recognized experts in the broad field of medicine.
Okay. You also won in 1995 the Annual Authors Award at University of South Florida.
Yes.
And in 88, even back then, the Chicago Healthcare Council Award for Healthcare Management.
Yes.
Let's talk about, and there are other ones, but let's go to some of the what are called national international responsibilities. Tell me what that means.
The academic, scientific, and clinical communities have a number of venues. Since my first appointment, I have sat on the Board of Counselors for the National Institute on Aging 2 years into becoming a faculty member, where we're reviewing the responsibilities and the accomplishments of the National Institutes on Aging. I sat on numerous study sections, which are again nationally based scientific programs where scientists are brought together to evaluate grants. And I have chaired many of these throughout my entire career. So basically, from the first time I became a faculty member until my retirement, I served on multiple committees.
Okay, well, let's just talk about a couple of them. Member NIH study section, social psychology, personality, and interpersonal processes. What's NIH?
The National Institutes of Health.
Okay. And tell me about that organization.
The National Institutes of Health is a major government agency that has many different institutes associated with it, ranging from the NIA, the National Institute on Aging, to the National Cancer Institute, to the National Infectious Disease Institute, so there are probably 20, 25 different groups. And the responsibilities of these groups is, again, to promote research excellence in the fields to which you're appointed.
And 2015 White House Conference on Aging, regional/national meeting, what is that?
There have been White House conferences on aging since 1961, about 10 years apart. There are many responsibilities. The people elected and appointed to these committees represent some of the top leaders in the field of aging, and the intent is not only to promote research, but to promote programs that will educate professionals as well as the public, and also to enhance the political and policy programs to support our growing aging population.
In 2006, you're a member of the National Institute of Health Study Section for Psychosocial Development, Risk, and Prevention. Is that dealing with aging?
Yes.
Board member, National Committee for the Prevention of Elder Abuse in Washington, D.C. Again, we're dealing with aging in that?
Yes.
Consultant, Office of the Inspector General, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C. Tell me a little bit about that.
I was working with them as a consultant, approved by the university to investigate Medicare fraud and abuse.
Okay. Again, let's talk about, you're a member of the advisory board, the Encyclopedia of Care of the Elderly, Springer Publishing Company. Is that what it sounds like? You're part of an advisory board looking at this
Correct.
encyclopedia that's being written?
Not just looking at it, but actively writing it, recruiting other individuals, and to maintaining the overall accuracy of the field at that stage.
I'm just looking through them, there are pages of them. A consultant, Department of Justice, 96 and 98 in Washington, D.C. Is that dealing with aging as well?
Yes, it was. Janet Reno had convened a group of experts to come in and look at issues affecting the abuse from injury to death in older people.
Member of Advisory Board, Center for Aging and Development, Medical College of Wisconsin. That obviously deals with aging.
Yes, it does.
Contractor to plan the 1995 White House Conference on Aging. Tell me what that means.
At that point, the Federal Council on Aging, which advises the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who in turn advised the President, or the Secretary and the President, wanted to have a national planning committee, but they only had a limited amount of money to spend. At that point, the President of the University of Illinois asked me if I would take on the responsibility of helping him convince other people to donate to the cause. So the University of Illinois put in a $1 amount of money to get the contract from the Federal Council on Aging, and with his help and the help of many people in the field, actually raised several $1 million to support the planning of the conference.
1981, you were an invited participant to the mini White House Conference on Aging. Tell me about that.
The structure of the White House Conference has changed over the years, and there was an attempt to broaden the involvement of the business community, to go beyond just the scientific community and politicians. And so there were, I would say, 20 some odd mini White House conferences on aging. I participated in the one on Alzheimer's disease. I participated in the one on business involvement. And again, it brought together groups of people who were identified as experts to help identify an agenda to improve the well-being of older people in our society.
Member of the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Animal Models for Research on Aging, Institute of Laboratory Animal Resources, National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C. Tell me about that particular involvement.
Being appointed to a National Academy of Science Committee is a prestigious appointment. That was a particularly interesting part of my career because at that time, the University of Washington maintained the largest and only primate community, macaque monkeys, in the country. And they were growing older, and the university had decided that they could no longer support older macaques because they were too expensive. Doug Bowden, who headed the Primate Center, brought in a group of us to help design a study, and we designed a study to compare 40-year-old macaques to 20-year-olds to 10-year-olds. Unfortunately, to do the biopsychosocial comparisons, we had to sacrifice some of the animals. They could not find a psychologist who would be willing to do the behavioral studies. So Dr. Bowden convinced my chairman that that was something I could do.
Now, go all the way back to '71. You were part of the staff for the White House Conference on Aging even back then.
Right.
Now, you also have several local responsibilities, and they're listed in your CV or your resume, and that will be putting into evidence. But let's just talk about a couple of them. You were a member of the Executive Committee for Elder Court in Hillsborough County.
Yes.
Advisory board member, University Community Hospital Senior Care.
Yes.
Now, books, there's a list of at least 11 books that you either authored or co-authored. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and they're all on the subject of aging
Yes.
and aging research.
Correct. And clinical work and education.
There are also journal articles and book chapters, and those number almost 200, 196 by count of your resume. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And again, all dealing with the field of aging
Yes, sir.
in terms of education
Yes, sir.
and research.
Yes, sir.
Okay. There are also some papers or articles that have been submitted that are waiting to be published. Is that right?
Correct.
You also have some technical reports in print.
Correct.
Part of your teaching experience, you've taught undergrad courses in biology of aging,
Correct.
the psychology of aging,
Yes.
honors courses in challenging in an aging society,
Yes.
applied ethics of aging,
Yes.
graduate courses in the psychopathology of aging,
Yes.
aging and mental health,
Yes.
the psychobiology of aging,
Yes.
and the biopsychosocial aspects of aging, right?
Correct.
Okay. You've also taught medical students,
Correct.
dental students,
Yes.
pharmacy students,
Yes.
law students.
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Dr. Cole, let me show you what's been marked as defense at this point, Exhibit G. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and is that your curriculum vitae?
Yes, sir.
Or I was referred to as resume. Is it the same thing?
It's a vita and a biography.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, defense would move, I'm sorry, did you see this, Martin?
No, may we approach?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Your Honor, this time, defense would tender Dr. Cohen as a qualified expert pursuant to 90.702 in the field of aging and aging studies.
Court finds she can testify as to those subjects.
Okay. Let's talk about the field of aging. Sounds very broad. Tell me a little bit about the field of aging and what that entails.
Aging is a natural process. It's also called senescence. It's a process of change in the biology, the psychology, the physiology, and behavior and social and environmental circumstances of older people. There are two reasons people age broadly. One is there are genetic causes, and second, there's something called wear and tear of the overall body, mind, as a result of time and exposure to a variety of circumstances. Aging, senescence, actually begins about 25, 30. You're not aware of those changes, but they are progressive. They progress at different rates in different people.
Let me talk about this a little bit. Would you agree or disagree with me that aging is universal?
Correct.
In terms of over the human
Absolutely.
population, right?
Correct.
And you talked about bio, psycho, social. Do I have that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The bio part is what? The biology?
Biology.
Tell me a little bit about that. What do you mean by biology?
Biology refers to changes in cells and tissues that lead to changes in functioning. So examples of that might be changes in the cells of muscles and cartilage around joints, so that the changes that occur, which may be a hardening of the cartilage, which can be aging but also due to injury and overuse, leads to some functional impairments in your ability to get around. There are aging changes in the eye that lead to a yellowing of the lens, which affects your ability to see near objects. The lens becomes stiff. The eye loses nerve cells, which leads to changes in depth perception. And in fact, it's probably the changes in the eye that awaken most people to be aware that something is changing in their body, because many of the biologic changes that are going on in your metabolic rate, in your breathing capacities, are not on your radar.
Yeah, well, let's talk about a couple of those things, just so I can understand. One is, you talked about decrease in muscles, or tell me about that. What does the aging process do to muscle mass? How is muscle mass affected by the process of aging?
Okay, I'll add caveat. It's affected by the process of aging, but it can also be changed by the physical activity that an individual has to maintain the muscle mass. But as a function of primary aging, which is changes that are not due to disease, you see that there are changes in, there's certain muscles that contribute to contraction, there's certain muscles that relax, and this slows down with time, but it happens gradually and cumulatively. There are changes in the nerve conduction velocity, so that if you asked me to hold my head back from the microphone as you did, I did it pretty quickly. If you had me just press something to show I had a good reaction time, it would be slowed. Reaction times are slowed due to changes in conduction along your nerves. And what happens to your nerves and muscles, because they're interconnected, is that it leads to problems in mobility and functioning at certain times. But again, it's not at the same rate and pace in all people.
Okay, and you said it's gradual. So does that mean that somebody would wake up one day and say, I'm old? Or is it cumulative, as you said? Tell me what you mean by cumulative. Is that the same as gradual?
Yes, but it also refers to a dynamic quality, that these changes are occurring, they're not on our radar screen, so that the difference in a 30-year-old and a 70-year-old would be about a brain weight in a 70-year-old, which is about 82% of what it was when they were 30. There'll be a change in their basal metabolic rate, how they metabolize and heat their bodies. And that goes down in a 70-year-old to 84% of their 30-year-old capacity. Your breathing tidal capacity in a 70-year-old is 45% of what it was as a 30-year-old. So these things are happening, but they don't necessarily impact your ability to drive a car to work, to do your job, to take care of your family. But at some point, these do become debilitating, and you also have changes physiologically that lead to an increased risk for disease and serious diseases. In fact, 74% of the Medicare population living in the community have 2 to 5 chronic conditions.
Now, let me ask you, you said the word disability, and you said the word functional impairment. What does functional impairment mean?
Functional impairment means you have trouble doing something. So that I fell on Bayshore Drive in Tampa and broke my wrist, and so I had problems. I was impaired in my ability to write with my right hand, but I could compensate by doing it with my left hand. It also affected my ability to do other things. So that functional impairment implies a loss of capacity that may be compensated by.
Okay, so loss of functional impairment, would that be, I can't walk from this lectern to the witness box as quickly as I used to 20 years ago? Would that be considered a functional impairment?
Yes.
And if that's a result of my arthritic knees, would that be, unless there's an injury, as part of the natural aging process?
It'd probably be a mixture of primary aging, but also we talked about aging being subject to wear and tear. So, repeated use of joints, repeated injuries, depending upon your occupation, could lead to significant impairment in your ability to do a variety of things that affect your mobility and your ability to function.
And let me ask you this, I probably should have asked you earlier. One thinks of aging and one thinks, well, I know that people get older. Tell me why you got involved in this field as an educator.
I was a undergraduate at Duke University from 1965 to 69. Duke was one of the few universities in the country that had a large aging center. And at that time, the aging center had 65% of the NIH budget for aging research. There were about 40 different faculty members involved in research and clinical work, and I was just attracted to the field. I also needed a job as an undergraduate, and even though I had a fellowship from the government, and got myself a job actually doing coding in the aging center. And as I got exposed to the graduate students and the faculty members, it became a passion for me.
Okay. And why is there a need to educate not only your students but the public about aging and aging issues?
Objection, relevance for this case.
Approach.
based on your research and your teachings, is the United States an ageist society?
Yes.
And tell me what you mean by that.
And we're not the only ageist society. The ageism reflects the negative attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors towards older people, and older people often taken to be 60, 65 and older.
Objection, relevance.
All right, approach.
We talked a little bit about the bio and biopsychosocial. Let's talk about the psycho. What are we talking about in that segment of that word in terms of aging?
We're talking about changes that may occur in your ability to learn things quickly, changes in short-term memory, long-term memory, your ability to problem solve, your ability to control your emotions, your ability to behave appropriately in different circumstances, either social circumstances or more demanding circumstances. It also refers to your personality, which remains largely stable throughout your lifespan unless you have a significant pathologic problem. There are changes in the brain and the nervous system which affect your psychological functioning, but also issues in biopsychosocial is a term to look at the overall body and mind, but biopsychosocial makes us think that there are discrete functions of all three. Actually, the bio, psycho, and social interact with each other to contribute to positive and negative outcomes, to contribute to the type of diseases people get in their different organ systems, so that it really does integrate, because aging is dynamic. So the biologic changes that you may have in your brain that leads to certain kinds of vulnerabilities in blood vessels, in nerve conduction, brain cell loss, actually does affect your behavior. So they're really interactive, if that's responsive.
Let's talk about the term used, vulnerabilities. The topic, vulnerability of the aged. Tell me what that means to you as a topic.
Vulnerability actually comes from the Latin word which means to wound. It is something that indicates one is in a position to be physically or emotionally hurt, attacked. The concept of vulnerability in older people rises directly out of the kinds of diseases, the kinds of injuries, the wear and tear, and the illnesses that people get. So the older people who are at risk for more medical and physical issues become vulnerable, meaning they're at risk to not be able to do things and not be able to protect themselves. In fact, the things that the older population are most afraid of are frailty, losing their health, being hurt, and having an untimely death.
Now, as one ages, is there a realization is there a heightened awareness of one's vulnerability? In other words, do we become, as we age, more aware that we're more vulnerable now than we were when we were younger?
It comes, but it's something that doesn't become part of your awareness on your radar screen until you're hitting late midlife and early old age. Bernice Newgarden described the categories of aging, which is the young old are 65 to 74, the old 75 to 84, and the oldest old 85 and older. So that sometime, again, depending upon your injuries, your illnesses, changes in your biology, which lead to immune dysfunction and to cancers, do affect your vulnerability and your ability to tolerate stress and your ability to respond to protect yourself.
And so let's talk a little bit about this idea of an awareness of the vulnerability. How does that dovetail in with how an older person would react to stress? Is there a difference between the aged realizing this vulnerability, reacting to stress? Do they have a heightened awareness or response to stress?
Yes, you can be a young person who's been severely injured and know that you can't do certain things and would be vulnerable. In fact, we all could be vulnerable to suffering. But what makes the older person population different is that having an awareness of not being able to do things as well, in fact, to be compromised. You may want, to have clean the gutters, but you're not going to go up on a ladder to clean the gutters. You're not going to do certain things knowing that it's not something that's safe to do. And older people who are without serious cognitive disorders do have an awareness of what they can do, what they can't do, and in fact change their behaviors to try and overcome the impairment.
Now, if an older individual, I guess a younger individual as well, but an older individual that has the cumulative effects of aging, that has the awareness of his or her vulnerability, if they are presented with a situation that presents a certain risk, would it be fair to call the individual making those decisions being involved in a risk assessment?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. Approach.
let's talk about vulnerability, this idea of heightened awareness among the aged. At times, would you agree that as an aged person approaches certain situations, they have to make certain decisions based on their limitations, right?
Correct.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. If an aged person is faced with an obstacle, let's say, okay, whether it's getting in a car from a wheelchair, that sort of thing, tell me about kind of the thought process. How does that work? How does an individual make a decision based on a situation that potentially could be injurious, like getting from a wheelchair into an Uber, for instance? Tell me how that works. So first of all, you're looking at the situation. Is that right? Walk me through that, please.
Your Honor, again, I'm going to object, same objection previously as objected.
Approach.
as we age, does it affect the way we see the world?
Absolutely.
How are some of the ways it affects the way we look at the world?
Aging, again, can be accompanied by diseases, so it affects the way we see ourselves and estimate or know our abilities to do certain things. It affects our ways of looking at other people in terms of being afraid, being happy, the full range of social interactions. It affects our being in social situations. It affects the way we look for housing. It affects the way we act if we lose a spouse or we lose a child or we lose someone that we love. The older person also has a lot of experiences based upon personal issues as well as occupational issues, and this history affects the way they think about themselves.
Okay, and so it affects places where they would go?
Correct.
Maybe places they would feel comfortable? Do you agree or
Correct.
disagree? Okay. Maybe you said even affect where they live?
Yes, in fact, there's a very large literature on vulnerability and the aged addressing these issues.
Okay, without talking about the literature, let's talk about your own research and your experience in a half century in the field of aging. Tell me about that.
Can you rephrase that or
Yes,
repeat it, please?
Does the process of aging, does the aged make choices of where they live based on their perceptions of self and vulnerability of that?
And
Your Honor, I cannot go exactly the same argument. 402, 403.
Let me approach, Your Honor.
Yes.
So as you get older, as we get older, and you realize what your limitations have become, does it affect the choices you make in life?
absolutely. And there's a large literature on
Okay,
vulnerability.
without talking about other people's literature, tell me about your own opinion and your own research and studies.
The choices that are made have to do with every single life circumstance you can imagine. It has to do with, will I continue living in the same house? Am I going to move to a safer environment? What can I do to take care of a spouse or another family member? What can I do if I'm having financial concerns? The whole range of decisions that people are making are based upon this. And this has come from my research with families and interviewing older people in clinical circumstances, and in some of the research where we're finding that it's
Excuse me, I object.
Your Honor, she said we're finding.
No.
Yeah, sustained.
Okay. So your answer then in terms of choices?
it influences almost every choice you make because of the challenges that you're facing based upon your potentially functional limitations your past history, any injuries and illnesses, because what aging does is put you in every organ system at risk for disease, frailty, and even if you don't get really sick, frailty affects older people for their last 11.4 years of their lives, which affects the decisions you make about how you live your life, what you do, and what you can't do.
Okay. May I have a moment, Your Honor?
You may.
No further questions. Thank you.
Klaus? Yeah. You may.
Dr. Cohen, you would agree with me that everyone ages differently as far as the progression.
I would say the population changes differently.
The population changes.
Right.
So the population would be the people in the population,
Correct.
which are individuals.
Right.
So everybody individually changes differently, correct?
Not everybody, not point person, but if you look at our aged population, the heterogeneity in the rates of aging,
what?
heterogeneity, the aged are less alike than any other age group because there are now about 15 million people over the age.
Dr. Cohen, I appreciate it, but you're not responsive
I'm
to
gonna
my,
object. She's
not
trying to
responsive
answer
to
the
my
question.
question.
Stop, one at a time, please.
Judge, I'm going to object. She's trying to answer the question. She needs to be allowed to answer the question, please.
She's not responsive to my question, and I have a right to stop her when she's not responsive and get her back on track.
All right. What was the question again?
My question was that every individual ages differently. That calls for either a yes or a no. She wants to explain it later, but she totally went off
Okay,
track.
all
My
right.
question to you, Dr. Cohen, is that you would agree with me that every individual will age differently.
No, not every individual.
Two individuals can age at the same pace.
Could, yes.
Okay. That leaves some other people that are aging at a different pace, correct?
Could, yes.
So when you had your discussion with Mr. Michaels before this jury, you gave us generally an education of the aging process, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you charge $200 an hour, right, for your time?
No.
How much do you charge for your time?
$425.
$425 for your time, and so far you've been paid over $2,000 in this case?
I think so.
Move on, Your Honor.
You may.
No further questions.
Redirect?
Prosecutor asked you if everyone ages differently. What about this? Does everyone age?
Yes.
No further questions.
Thank you. May this witness be released?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Dr. Curran. You're free to go.
Thank you.
Yes? Who's our next witness?
It's gonna be Mrs. Reeves, Your Honor.
Maybe we better take a break. Take a short recess before we start that
It'd be fine
witness.
with the defense.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's take 10 minutes. Remember my instructions during recess, and we'll see you back shortly.
All rise, court is in recess.
I left the thing on. Sorry. Hope you guys weren't chatting too much. All right, we ready? Okay.
Can we approach before the jury comes?
Yes. Tina, hold up. Okay.
Thursday in the courtroom, Your Honor. Judges may be seated. Jurors are present and accounted for, Your Honor.
Thank you, Deputy. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for returning. Were you all able to abide by my instructions during the recess? Excellent. All right. Who's next?
Defense calls Vivian Reeves.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Go ahead, Mr. Michaels.
Please state your name.
Vivian Reeves.
Okay. And do you know Curtis Reeves?
Yes,
How do you know Curtis Reeves?
he's my husband.
Now, we've met Matthew and Jennifer. Are those your children?
Yes.
Do you have any other children?
No,
We heard about your grandchild Madison. Any other grandchildren?
just Madison.
Now, how old are you?
75.
And so back in 2014, on January 13th, how old were you?
Gonna make me do math.
67?
Thank you.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about that. Of 67, how long have you been married to Mr. Reeves?
54 years last October.
So back then, it would have been 46 years.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, during that time, I guess you got married when you were young. Is it fair to say by 2014 you were growing old together?
Yes.
Now, let's talk about some of the things that you've noticed and certainly that your husband noticed about you. On 2014, did you look older than you did when you got married?
Yes.
Did you look older than you did 10 years before that?
Yes.
Now, let's talk about some of the things that you were feeling. Let's talk about your in terms of looks, let's talk about your arms and hands, okay? Did your arms look the same as they did 10 years before 2014?
No.
Or your hands?
No.
And so, what about the I want to say that the quality of your skin, did you bruise more easily around 2014?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
I can hit something and get that dark purple bruise.
Okay. And what about cuts?
My skin is very thin. I have scars from hitting things. Oh, I have scars from when I fell and hit things.
All right. And so back in 2014, that was kind of your state in terms of your skin.
Yes.
Let's talk about your hands. Back in 2014, did you have difficulty performing tasks around the house?
I did.
Okay. Such as opening jars, yes or no?
Yes.
All right. And let me ask you, in terms of your hands themselves, did your hands feel stiff, or were you still able to move them like you used to back in 2014?
No, they're stiff.
And did you have pain in your hands?
Yes.
In the morning?
Various times.
Okay. In terms of your breathing back in 2014, did you have difficulty at times breathing?
Yes, I did.
Did you have difficulty at times breathing when you walked up the stairs?
Yes,
And did you go seek treatment for that?
I did.
And were you eventually sent to Moffitt for some
Yes.
treatment? Okay. Now, let's talk about your knees and legs. I saw you limped up here. Were you limping in 2014 or not like that?
Not like this, but I had a problem
Okay. Did you have pain in your knees back then?
in one knee.
Okay. And that's something that you addressed through some treatment?
Yes.
Now, you said you fell down. When you fell down, were you in the house?
Yes,
And was your husband Curtis there?
yes.
And did Mr. Reeves try to pick you up?
One of those times, yes.
Okay. And did he have problems doing that?
He couldn't.
Now, let's talk a little bit about what you noticed about your husband. Again, he looks older than when you married him, right?
Yes,
Would you agree that in the last 10 years before 2014, he's looked older and older?
yes.
Let me ask you this, has he gained weight since his retirement?
A lot of weight, yes.
Talking about Mr. Reeves' arm and skin on his arms, did you notice him bruising?
Yes.
Okay, and what sort of things did you see that would cause a bruise around the house?
He used to work, he doesn't now, but he used to work with wood and with metal, and he was always hurting himself or picking up sticks that fell out of the oak trees. His skin would break.
Okay, and so his skin would break, you described when he would be working in the yard?
Yes,
And did you do anything to try to treat that injury?
yes. I bought Dermend for bruising. It didn't do very much, but we still use it. And for cuts, it's a powder that burns. I can't think of the name of it. And it wound seal.
And you were using that prior to 2014?
Yes,
Now let's talk a little bit about, you know what your husband obviously did for a living.
yes.
Now, when he retired, let me ask you this, while he was with the Tampa Police Department, was he a person that always kept very physically fit?
He did.
Okay. And did he run as far as you knew?
He did.
And at some point, did he stop running?
Yes,
Now, he then worked for, your husband worked for Busch Gardens. When he worked for Busch Gardens, did he have to get some kind of special shoes?
he bought better shoes than he was wearing. He got 2 pair, a black pair and a brown pair, and he had to go and have orthotics made to go in his shoes.
And that was prior to 2014.
Yes,
Was he also receiving some treatment such as injections in the bottom of his feet?
yes,
And was he also using a TENS machine?
yes.
Now, when he worked around the yard, as he got older, did he wear any sort of brace or any sort
He
kind
wore
of
a back
equipment?
a brace that went all the way around his middle. He's had several. I think one had straps on it, but he's had several different braces.
Now, we're talking before 2014 up to January 13th of 2014. Did you ever notice your husband have difficulty in, for instance, tying his shoes?
Yes,
Okay. Did he have trouble all the time or just sometimes?
just sometimes.
In terms of buttoning his buttons and that sort of thing, would he have trouble sometimes?
Sometimes.
Now, the day that this happened, January 13th, let's talk a little bit about that. On that day, was your husband able to dress himself?
Yes,
Okay. Put on his shirt, all that,
yes,
tie his shoes?
yes.
Okay. Did he tie his
I
shoes?
don't know. I don't think he had shoes that tied.
Okay, and we'll talk about that a little later. And so what were the plans for January 13th?
It happened in the morning. It was not planned ahead. He had returned with my son from a hunting trip.
Your husband?
Yes.
Okay.
And Curtis wanted to go see the movie Lone Survivor because Matt had read the book and then Curtis read it. And it probably originally was going to be just Matt and Curtis, but I wanted to go because it was based on a true story.
All right. And so you decided to go to a matinee, is that right?
Yes.
Why a matinee?
We always went to matinees. I think it's cheaper.
Okay. And so who drives to the movies? Who
Curtis
drives?
drove.
Okay, so it's you and Curtis in the car?
Yes.
And what are the plans in terms of your son, Matt?
He was going to meet us there.
Now, what happens when you get to the theater? There's some places that are right in front. Why did you park in those places? Let me ask you this, did you purposely park far away from the theater, or did you park as close as you could with an open space?
I don't remember.
Okay. Do you remember walking from the car to the
Yes, I
theater?
do.
Any problems walking there?
No,
Okay. Did Mr. Reeves have any problems walking there?
no.
All right. And so you get to the theater, you get to the window. Who pays for the ticket?
Curtis.
All right. And so you buy the tickets at the window, and then you go into the lobby, I would imagine.
Yes.
Okay. What happens once you get into the lobby of the movie theater?
We bought popcorn and one drink.
And the popcorn, was that his, yours?
Both of us
Okay. You were going to share it.
share it.
And before you went in the theater, did you make any other stops?
Yes, I went to the restroom.
Now, when you walk into the theater, do you have any plan on sitting in any certain section of the theater?
No, we generally like to sit in the middle, not all the way up. That's the first time we've done that, but I don't know how to say. In that upper section, probably the middle.
Okay, so not quite all the way where you all sat,
Right.
but somewhere between the front and the back,
Yes.
the middle.
Yes.
And so when you went in the theater, why didn't you sit in that middle section?
The theater was not full, but people were spaced apart, and we were looking for 3 seats together, and preferably 5, because I like to leave a seat on the edge if the theater's not full.
All right, and so was the plan to have Curtis Reeves, you in the middle, and then Matt on the end?
Yes.
And then one extra seat on the side, that
Yes.
little room? And so that's how you ended up in the rear of the theater, the back room?
Yes.
Okay. Now, once you get into the theater, are you there before the previews start?
Yes.
Now, as you walk in, now you know it was Mr. Oulson and Mrs. Oulson. Tell me where they were seated in relation to where you and Curtis Reeves sit, you and your husband, Curtis.
Mr. and Mrs. Oulson were in the row in front of us. Mr. Oulson was in front of me, and Mrs. Oulson was in front of Curtis.
Okay. Now, when you went to sit in your seats, do you notice anything about Mr. Oulson?
His phone screen is lit. He's doing something on his phone.
Okay. Do you know what he was doing?
No, I don't.
Was he talking on the phone?
No, sir. Not that I heard.
And so now you sit down. right?
Yes.
Okay, who has the popcorn?
Curtis was carrying it, and I took a Ziploc bag from home and just put some in it so I could hold it.
All right, so you're holding your popcorn and Curtis Reeves,
Yes.
holding his popcorn. Now, you said the previews didn't come on. Do you at some point see a message saying, the movie theater telling people to put away their phones?
Yes, I did.
And once that happens, tell me, is there any sort of conversation or any kind of communication between your husband and Mr. Oulson?
Yes, Curtis leaned forward toward Mr. Oulson, and he spoke so softly. I don't know. I thought that I heard the word phone, but I cannot be sure.
And would you say, did you hear really either one of them talk except for maybe the word phone?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you didn't hear either one of them? In other
Oh,
words,
no.
you didn't hear your
I heard-
husband? Did you hear your husband?
I know. I couldn't hear him.
Okay.
Maybe I heard the word phone,
Okay.
but I'm not certain.
All right. And so they were both speaking in lower tones, is that fair to say?
No.
Okay, tell me what you mean by that.
Mr. Oulson very loudly said,
We're going to get there. So first what happens
Okay.
is Curtis leans forward and you hear some soft conversation.
yes,
You don't know who spoke first, do you?
Curtis did.
And then you hear something, the word phone, That's what you described,
Yes.
something like that, okay. And then after that, what happens?
Mr. Oulson responded in a very loud and ugly voice.
Okay, now, you don't have to say the word, but describe what he said. What, did he use the F word?
Yes, he did.
What do you remember him saying?
He used the F word, and he's texting his daughter.
Hey, do you know that he said texting, or do you just remember that he said the word daughter?
I'm not certain.
Now, at that point, were the previews on?
Yes.
And were you able to hear Mr. Oulson's voice over the previews?
Oh, yes.
Were the previews, was Mr. Oulson's voice then louder than the previews?
It was loud. It was louder than the previews.
Now, was it possible that the trailers were playing? In other
Yeah.
words, okay,
Yes,
that's the same as previews to you.
previews.
Now, let me ask you this. When you heard that response from Mr. Oulson, how did it make you feel?
It scared me. I've never.
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
Okay. So let's take out that it scared you. You heard that, those words, and tell me then what happened next.
I don't know what period of time, short time. Curtis handed me his pop. He stood up. He handed me his popcorn, and stood up and said, "I'm going to get the manager."
All right. Now, when you saw your husband stand up and get the manager, at that point, had Mr. Oulson turned around at all, or you're just hearing him?
I'm just hearing him.
Now, your husband gets up, tells you he's going to get the manager. Do you say anything to your husband?
I said, "Let's just move."
Do you know if your husband heard you or not?
I don't.
Did he respond to you at all?
No.
Did he say, "We're not going to move"?
No.
You've known your husband for almost 50 years at that point, now over 50 years. Did your husband appear to be angry to you?
No.
Was he mumbling at all?
No.
Now tell me what you saw your husband do. He got up, you described, and then what happened?
And then he slowly felt his way down the aisle.
Okay, and as your husband leaves, do you watch him leave, or this time are you watching the screen?
I was not looking at Mr. Oulson. I was either looking to his right side. I saw the screen, but I couldn't tell you what was on the screen. I didn't want to be there.
Okay, and so is there a reason why you just didn't get up and move?
Well, Curtis had texted Matt, I think, where we were sitting, and I thought about getting up, but I didn't.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Do you agree or disagree with me that you were expecting your son to come in any minute and sit next to you?
Yes.
Now, when your husband left, I guess at some point, does he come back?
Yes.
Now, once your husband comes back, tell me what happened. Is there some kind of conversation between your husband and Mr. Oulson in front of him?
Yes, but something happens before that.
Tell me about it.
Curtis sits down and takes his popcorn from me.
Okay, so when Curtis Reeves comes back, your husband, he passes in front of you,
Yes.
and when he passes in front of you, does he say anything to you?
No.
Again, do you hear him grumbling in any way?
No.
And when he passes you, he takes back the popcorn, is that what you described?
Right.
Okay, and then you described that he sits down again to your left.
Yes.
Because I forgot to ask you that, your husband is seated to your left.
Yes.
Now, once your husband sits down, does something happen?
He leans forward and.
Your husband,
Yes.
okay? And do you hear anything that your husband said?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Do you agree or disagree with me that you observed both men speaking, Mr. Oulson and your husband?
Yes.
Do you know who spoke first?
I'm not sure.
And that's fair, so if you don't know who spoke first, you don't know who spoke first, right?
Right.
So do you know who spoke first?
Objection
I
has to
don't.
answer.
Sustained.
Now, did you hear Mr. Oulson say anything in response to your husband leaning forward?
Objection, hearsay.
It's not for the truth of the matter, sir. May we approach you?
Yes, approach.
Did you hear Mr. Oulson say something at that point?
Yes.
What did he say?
Something to the effect of, you told on me who the F, only he said the word, do you think you are?
Now, at that point, were the previews on?
Yes.
And was this loud enough for you to hear?
Oh, yes.
Now, at that point, was Mr. Oulson seated still, or had he turned around?
This all happened very quickly. It's hard to take it a piece at a time. He did stand up and
Well,
turn
we're
around.
going to talk about that. So, in terms of when Mr. Oulson said that, do you remember whether he was sitting or standing up?
I'm not sure.
Now, at some point, does Mr. Oulson stand up?
Oh, yes, very quickly.
And when he stands up, does he turn around?
Yes,
And when you say turn around, he's right in front of you.
yes,
Is that right?
yes.
And when he turns around, is he facing you?
He's leaning towards Curtis.
Okay. So he's right in front of you, you're saying, and leaning towards your husband.
Yes.
Yeah, excuse me. I would object to the constant summing up of the testimony. We've let it go a couple times, but now we're into some critical testimony, so I object to the summation of the testimony by counsel.
Your Honor, we're just putting it into context. Certainly, I'm not asking you the same question again.
No, he's gratuitously.
Can we approach, Your Honor? Now, once Mr. Oulson stood up, what is the next thing What is the next thing you observe Mr. Oulson do?
He leans towards Curtis. It seemed like his whole upper body was leaning towards Curtis.
And when you observe that motion, how did it make you feel in terms of what it looked like to you?
I thought he was coming over, and it just freaked me out. I was terrified.
You thought that Mr. Oulson was coming over the seat?
I did.
And so what happened when you saw that?
I briefly saw Curtis lean back, or
Okay,
lean.
let's talk about that.
Okay,
You see Mr. Oulson now leaning over the seat,
yes,
and do you, at that point, look at your husband?
briefly, because he moved.
And tell me what you mean, your husband moved?
I could see that his body was moving
Moving in which direction?
towards the left.
Okay, and you're kind of leaning back as well. Is that what you're trying to describe here?
Yes,
Okay, so you see, after your husband leans back and to his left, do you see your husband's leg at all?
I think his leg was stretched out.
His right leg?
Yes,
And do you see your husband reaching for his pistol?
I do not.
Certainly you knew that your husband probably had one, right?
He normally did, but I never even. It's not something I thought about.
Did your husband announce it to you? I'm taking my pistol or anything like that?
No,
Now, you see, once your husband leans back and stretches out his leg, do you see Mr. Oulson doing anything more to your husband?
I either closed my eyes or turned to the right.
Do you see Mr. Oulson going back over his seat then again?
No,
Do you see Mr. Oulson reaching over the seat again?
no,
Do you see Mr. Oulson grabbing the popcorn from your husband's hand?
not personally. The only place I saw that was on the video.
Okay, so when you were in the theater, did you see that?
No,
Did you see Mr. Oulson bringing back the popcorn?
no,
Did you see Mr. Oulson then move forward with it
no,
and throw it in your husband's face?
no,
Did you see the shot?
no,
Did you hear it?
yes.
What happened once you saw the shot? What did you do?
At some point, I moved a couple of seats away, but I couldn't do that until people got up and moved.
And what was your emotional state at that point?
I didn't know what happened, and I couldn't believe it. I was never been that scared before in all my life.
Now, were you scared because of Mr. Oulson coming towards your husband?
That's when it started.
Now, did you look over at your husband after the shot? was fired?
Eventually,
Okay. Did you see him touching his face or doing anything with
he
his
had
hands?
his hands up to this area.
Did you look on the ground and see anything?
I did.
What did you see?
I saw a cell phone and popcorn.
Okay. And where was the cell phone located?
It was between Curtis's feet. It wasn't the picture that I've seen. It wasn't that close. Like if this was the ledge, in the pictures I've seen, it looked pretty close, but it was further back when I saw it.
Okay. And so when you took a look at that, did you know whose phone that was?
This was stupid because Curtis didn't have his phone out, but I didn't think anybody else's phone would be there, so I thought it was his.
Now, did you see your husband get hit with anything
I didn't.
or get punched?
No.
But after Mr. Oulson leaned over the seat as you described the first time, agree or disagree with me, you, aside from seeing your husband move in his seat, you didn't see anything else? Agree or disagree?
All right, I'll overrule.
Agree or disagree, you didn't see anything else after that?
No.
Now, at some point, do you see your son in the theater?
Yes, but yes, I did.
Okay.
Coming down I think he was in our row.
All right. And does he take you out of the theater?
Not then. He had blood on his hands and his clothes.
And so did he leave and come back?
Yes, he said, let me get cleaned up.
Now, does he come back into the theater to get you?
He does.
And where do you go from there?
We went to the little tables by the concession stand.
And what happens while you're there?
I thought that Matt went out again, but I'm not. But people started coming out of the theater and sitting at those tables and talking.
Did you hear them talking about, without telling me what they were saying, what was going on?
I do not remember what they were saying. I was so upset that I don't know what they were saying.
So at some point, do you speak to police?
Yes.
Do you know how many you spoke to?
I talked to Detective Smith, I think, and then 2 detectives interviewed me and recorded it, but there were people coming in and out.
Okay.
When I say people, I meant sheriff's deputies.
So you spoke to one detective, I guess, verbal, speaking to him,
Yes,
that wasn't recorded.
right,
Then you spoke to another one that was recorded.
yes.
The one you spoke to, did you tell that particular detective that you didn't know who said the F word?
No, I didn't. I knew who said it.
Did you tell them that you told your husband that you wanted to move and he refused to move?
No,
To move seats?
no.
May I approach the clerk, please?
You may.
May I have State's Exhibit 50, please? May I approach the witness?
You may.
Mrs. Reeves, I'm showing you what's been marked State Exhibits 60. Do you remember that?
I do.
Do you recognize that shoe?
Yes.
And how do you recognize that shoe?
That's the kind of shoe that Curtis wore that didn't tie.
Well, let's talk about that. Is that the shoe he was wearing that day?
I assume it is.
Okay. Is that the type and
Yes.
brand?
The brand.
Is that his size?
Yes.
Now let's look at these laces. Are these laces that you have to tie?
No. They were just like, their shoes were just like my granddaughter's.
Nothing further, thank you.
Thank you. Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Do we have a moment, Judge?
You may.
May it please the court, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Mrs. Oulson, Mrs. Reeves, good morning.
Yes, sir.
If I ask you a question that you don't understand, just let me know, okay?
Thank you.
All right. Now, Mrs. Reeves, as you walked to your seats, you in fact saw Mr. Oulson on his cell phone, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And there were no previews playing at that time?
No.
As you sat down, did you see him with his phone out?
Once I sat down, he was so tall. No, I did not see it.
Okay. Did you see the light emitting from the phone?
No. Not after I sat.
Okay. He wasn't talking on the phone though, correct?
Not that I heard.
All right. And you indicated previously that you were sitting behind Mr. Oulson, correct?
Correct.
And the defendant was sitting behind Mrs. Oulson?
Yes, sir.
And you would agree with me that y'all were in a very small, confined space,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
The defendant, your husband, was right next to you.
Yes.
Mr. and Mrs. Oulson were 2 to 3 feet away from you, correct?
Yes.
There was a point in time when the defendant made contact with Mr. Oulson, correct?
Verbal.
Okay. And is that after the screen showed or said, hey, put your phones away?
Yes, sir.
All right, you would agree with me that the defendant, your husband, initiated the contact with Mr. Oulson.
Yes.
And in fact, you couldn't hear what was being said, correct?
I could not hear my husband. I feel like I heard the word phone, but I can't be sure.
All right, you're not sure, are you?
No, sir.
You would agree with me that during the conversation that the defendant had with Mr. Oulson, he never turned around in his seat, right?
Right.
In fact, you were looking at the back of his head the whole time.
I was trying not to look at him, Mr. Garcia. Or
Okay. When your husband and Mr. Oulson had these conversations, Mr. Oulson's face was facing the screen, right?
As far as I know.
All right. In fact, you never saw his face.
Right.
He never turned around during that sequence of events, did he?
That's correct.
He never placed his arms, legs, or anything over the back of the seat at that time, correct?
Not at that time.
Okay. Did you ever hear any words of violence directed to the defendant, in this case, your husband, Mr. Reeves?
I didn't.
And you were right there, right?
Yes, sir.
You would agree with me that Mr. Oulson never made any movements towards the defendant, correct? At that time?
At that time. That's correct.
You would agree with me there comes a time that the defendant says, I'm going to see the manager,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
He gets up and leaves.
Yes.
Now, you indicated you were afraid, right? You were scared.
I was scared when Mr. Oulson said what he said.
Okay.
When my husband left, I was more ticked off that this was happening.
Okay.
I
You
was
would agree?
I was uncomfortable.
All right, you're uncomfortable, you're scared. You would agree with me that you had every opportunity. You could have left and gone with your husband, right?
I could have.
You didn't, though.
No, we expected my son to come there.
Okay. And in fact, during the time that the defendant had gone to the manager, Mr. Oulson never said one word to you, did he?
No, sir.
He never turned around in his seat.
No.
He didn't have the phone out, correct?
I don't know. I couldn't see.
All right. He wasn't rude to you.
No.
In fact, he didn't say one word to you that whole time.
Right.
Mr. Reeves, the defendant comes back, correct?
Correct.
You would agree with me that he initiates contact with Mr. Oulson again.
After he sits down and takes his popcorn, yes.
Okay. the 3 times that he has contact with Mr. Oulson, your husband, the defendant, initiated that contact, correct?
Sir, I don't remember but 2, and Curtis initiated them.
Okay. Well, let's go through them. You remember the first one, right? About
Yes.
putting the phone away.
Yes,
There's a second initiation when he says to him, I'm going to the manager. That's number 2.
I don't remember that.
You don't recall that?
I don't.
And then the third would be when he comes back from the manager's office and he sits down and he made a statement to him, right?
That's right.
Do you remember what he said?
What Curtis said?
Yes, ma'am.
I couldn't hear him.
You didn't hear it at all.
No,
You have no idea what he said.
no,
Okay. Up until that point in time, you didn't hear any threats from Mr. Oulson, did you?
no, sir.
And again, to clarify, prior to him coming back from the manager's office, Mr. Oulson never turned in his chair to face the defendant.
As far as I know, no.
Now, you would agree with me that the defendant, your husband, sits down, right?
Yes, sir.
And you said he had gotten the popcorn from you.
Yes,
And at some point in time, you said that he's leaning to his left, correct?
correct.
With his right leg extended.
Yes, sir.
Now, you would agree with me, would you not? You knew that Mr. Reeves, the defendant, had a pistol in his pocket.
I actually did not know that.
You would agree with me that every time Mr. Reeves, the defendant, went out, he had a pistol. He was always carrying a pistol.
I never asked.
You-
Based on my life experience with him, I assume he carried a pistol, but I never saw it. I never asked. We didn't talk about it.
Okay. But you assumed because he always carried it, correct?
I wasn't really assuming, but okay,
Well, you said, you used the word, I assumed.
okay. Based on my life's experience, I'll assume he had a pistol.
All right, well, let me ask you this. He never left the home without either a pistol or a revolver in his pocket, correct?
I don't know that. There are some places that you can't take a gun in, and I don't know, for instance, I don't know whether he took one to church or not.
Okay. All right, so you see the defendant, your husband, leaning back, correct?
Yeah,
To
it
his
was
left?
just a brief glance.
All right. And you see his right leg out.
Yes, sir.
And you said you saw, at this point, you see Mr. Oulson standing,
Yes.
right? Did you ever see him hit the defendant?
No.
Did you
Okay, I'm sorry.
ever hear a slap or hit? You hear skin on skin, something loud, like if someone had been punched.
No, sir.
Did you see him throw a phone?
No, sir.
Did you see him throw anything?
No. I wish I had. I just couldn't handle it.
Your Honor, I'm going to ask that her last statements be stricken as gratuitous and not responsive to a question. It's the second time.
All right, I'll overrule now, but let's just answer the question, please.
So never saw any type of object thrown towards the defendant in this case, correct?
No, sir.
And as the defendant, your husband, is leaning to his left and with his right leg out, you never heard him saying, no, 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 whoa, 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 did you?
No, sir.
In fact, you never saw his left hand out, did you?
I just glanced briefly when my husband started to move, and I thought he was trying to get away. I wasn't just staring at him.
You would agree with me, this was all happening right in front of you,
Yes,
correct?
sir. Yes, sir, but it was very fast.
May I have a moment, Judge?
You may.
Mrs. Reeves, you indicated that you closed your eyes, correct?
I don't know if I turned away or closed my eyes, but I didn't see anything else.
Okay. Now, going back, you indicated you saw Mr. Oulson standing up, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you indicated that you had seen your husband leaning to his left with his right leg out, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, do you agree, being in a previous hearing?
Yes, I was at Stand Your Ground.
Page 709, line 4. Do you recall this question being asked of you? Did you see anything after Mr. Oulson was lunging over the seat coming after Curtis? And your answer, no, I wish I had.
I don't remember that specifically, but I know that when Curtis moved,
Well,
I took a brief glance, and then after he came over, no, I don't know another thing until after the gunshot.
okay. So you would agree with me that in this previous hearing, you never said anything about him leaning to his left and extending his right leg, did you?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Okay. Well, you would agree with me that you said, no, I wish I had. Correct?
Yes, sir.
May I have a moment, Judge?
You may.
Mrs. Reeves, you would agree with me that this is the first time we heard you state that you saw him leaning to his left with his right leg out in front of him, correct?
No, sir.
Okay. Judge, may I approach the witness, please?
Yes?
Mrs. Reeves, I'm going to ask that you read silently to yourself
Here.
these lines here. Yes, yes, ma'am.
Page, Mr. Garcia.
Page 709, starting at line 4.
What is this from?
It's just from a previous hearing.
Okay.
Sorry, may we approach briefly?
Yeah, can we?
Yes.
All right, recess for the jurors. Jury is out.
Thank you.
Yeah, Your Honor.
You may. Okay. You can bring them back. Okay.
Thank you. Ready for the jury, Your Honor?
Yep.
Jurors into the courtroom.
Okay.
Jurors will be seated. All jurors are present and accounted for.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I know you had a very brief break, but were you all able to abide by my instructions during the recess? Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Garcia.
Judge, may I approach the witness, please?
You may.
So, Mrs. Reeves, you had an opportunity to read that question,
Yes, sir.
and you would agree with me that it was asked after Mr. Oulson stood up, and you said,
After he lunged.
right, coming after Curtis, that you did not see anything.
It kind of happened at the same time.
Well, you would agree with me that your answer was, no, I wish I had, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Your Honor, I would ask that the court to direct the prosecutor to page 754 of the same hearing, lines 14 through 17.
Okay.
Perhaps he can give that to the witness to read that and ask her questions concerning that, or if he's done, I'll be happy to.
Okay.
the lines again, Mr. Michael?
If the court can have the prosecutor read page 754, lines 14 through 17 to the jury. Actually can go all the way down to the bottom of the page, page 25. Line 25. So page 754, lines 14 through 25. Same proceeding.
May I approach the witness, Judge?
Yeah, man.
For the record, referring to page 754, lines 14 through 17. Mrs. Reeves, I ask that you read lines 14 through 17 to yourself, please.
Right here, where the,
25,
Oh,
Judge, under
14, I've
doctrine of
got it.
completeness, he needs to read it.
or you can do so on cross.
If, starting on line 14, this question, and then your answer.
Or on redirect, sorry.
But it was improper impeachment under the doctrine of completeness, he needs to read it right then and there.
I see that.
Okay. All right, do you remember being asked this question? You saw Mr. Reeves kind of lean over on his left butt cheek, stretch his leg out. Did you see that? Answer, no, leaned way back, yes.
I'm sorry, he says he leaned way back, yes to the left.
No, no.
He leaned way back, yes to the left. Correct? That's what you said?
Yes, you leaned back and to the left.
All right. You would agree with me in the same here, and you made two contradictory statements, correct?
I don't see the contradiction.
Earlier you said you wish you had seen it. Later on you're saying you saw it.
No, I wish I had seen the popcorn thrown and the phone and things like that.
Okay. The question before you back then, there was nothing about popcorn being thrown and the phone. That wasn't the question that was posed to you. Correct?
You did ask me that. Okay, I'm out of context.
All right. So you would agree with me you gave two contradicting statements.
No, I don't agree.
Okay. Earlier you said you wish you had seen it. Now here you're saying you saw him lean to his left.
When I said I wish I had seen it, I was not talking about him leaning. I wish I had seen everything.
All right. The question was, when you saw Mr. Oulson stand, you never mentioned anything about Mr. Reeves, the defendant, leaning to his left and stretching out his right leg, correct?
I don't know.
Objection, Your Honor, that's an improper characterization. He just asked, in answer to the question, did you see Mr. Reeves lean to his left and stretch out his leg? And certainly,
Do you want to approach, or shall we just
Mrs. Reeves, did you at any time ever see Mr. Oulson in your aisle?
No,
Completely over in your
No.
aisle? Correct?
correct.
You never saw him climbing over a chair either, did you?
No, sir.
I have no further questions, Judge.
Read it right?
Thank you. Never saw Mr. Oulson climbing over his seat into the aisle. That's what you testified to.
Yes,
Did you see him leaning over the chair with his upper body coming into the aisle
yes,
towards you and your husband?
yes,
Now, the prosecutor talked to you and you said he's trying to get away. When you said he's trying to get away, were you talking about your husband?
yes. I thought that's why he was leaning so far back.
And did it appear to you that he, your husband, was trying to get away from Mr. Oulson coming over the chair?
That's what I thought, yes.
Thank you.
May this witness be excused?
Your Honor, we have her under subpoena, so we will reserve her.
All right,
We have our understanding.
okay. You are free to have a seat, but you need to,
Thank you.
if you're called back, you have to come. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and take a lunch break. If you would, remember my instructions during the recess. Do not do any independent research or discuss the facts of the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. I'm going to let you come back at 1 o'clock and just report back to the jury pool room. Thank you.
All right, for the recess, 1 o'clock lunch.
All right.